There is a moment, just before the performance begins, when the actor stands behind the curtain and feels the weight of the mask in their hands. It is neither heavy nor light. It simply exists, waiting to transform whoever dares to wear it. And in that silence, in that breath held between who they are and who they will pretend to be, something ancient awakens. Something that has lived in the human heart since the first lie was told, since the first smile concealed a dagger, since the first tear was shed not from pain but from strategy. Welcome to the theater of human behavior, where empathy is not always a gift, but sometimes a weapon sharpened by those who understand that to control others, you must first understand them completely. You are about to enter a world where nothing is as it seems, where the kindest gesture may hide the coldest calculation, where the person who listens most carefully to your pain might be the one mapping your vulnerabilities, like a cartographer of the soul. This is not a story about villains in the traditional sense. This is a story about survival, about adaptation, about the masks we all wear and the price we pay for wearing them. Before we continue, a warning. The knowledge that's about to be shared cannot be unlearned. It will permanently change the way you see human relationships. If you're ready to abandon comfortable illusions and see what's behind the stage, subscribe now. Because this isn't just a video. It's the beginning of your journey under the mask. Now let us begin. Picture a room. Not any room, but the kind of space where power is negotiated in whispers. The air is thick, not with smoke or perfume, but with intention. Every breath carries weight. Every silence speaks volumes. In this room sits a woman. Let us call her Elena. Her posture is perfect, not rigid but composed, like a dancer who has learned that every movement tells a story. Her hands rest gently on the table, fingers interlaced, and if you were to look at her face, you would see concern. Deep, genuine concern. Her eyes are soft, slightly moist, as if she might cry at any moment for the pain of the person sitting across from her. That person is Marcus. He is speaking, and his voice cracks with emotion. He is telling Elena about his childhood, about a father who never said I love you, about a mother who was there but somehow absent, about the hollow feeling that lives in his chest like a second heart, one that beats with loneliness instead of blood. And Elena listens. She listens with her entire being. She nods at precisely the right moments. She makes small sounds of understanding, those tiny affirmations that tell someone, yes, I hear you. Yes, I see you. Yes, you are not alone. When Marcus pauses, struggling to find words for feelings that have no language, Elena reaches across the table and places her hand on his. Her touch is warm. Her grip is gentle but firm, the kind of touch that says I am here. I will not let you fall. Marcus feels something shift inside him. It is relief, profound and overwhelming. For the first time in months, perhaps years, he feels understood. He feels seen. And in that moment, he would do anything for Elena. Anything at all. He does not know, cannot know, that Elena has never experienced what he is describing. She has never felt that particular flavor of abandonment. Her childhood was different. Her wounds are different. But she has studied pain the way a musician studies scales. She knows its rhythms, its patterns, its universal language. She knows that when someone speaks of a distant father, their shoulders will curve inward slightly, protecting the heart. She knows that when someone mentions absent mother, their eyes will drift to the left, searching for a memory that feels more like a ghost. She has learned to recognize these signs not through shared experience, but through observation, through practice, through the careful study of human vulnerability. This is not empathy in the way we have been taught to understand it. This is something else entirely, something more dangerous and more powerful. This is cognitive empathy weaponized, transformed from a bridge between souls into a key that unlocks doors meant to stay closed. Elena is what modern psychology might call a neo-Machiavellian, though she would never use that term herself. She would simply say she understands people. She would say she is good at relationships. She would say, if pressed, that she cares deeply about others. And in a way, she would not be lying. The mask she wears is not made of porcelain or plastic. It is made of genuine human emotion, carefully curated and strategically deployed. Let us pause here and understand what we are witnessing. There are 3 types of empathy that psychologists have identified. The first is emotional empathy, the ability to feel what another person feels, to have your heart break when there's breaks, to laugh when they laugh, to carry their joy and pain as if it were your own. The second is compassionate empathy, which goes beyond feeling to action, the drive to help, to heal, to make things better. But the third type, cognitive empathy, is different. It is the ability to understand what someone else is feeling without necessarily feeling it yourself. It is the capacity to map another person's emotional landscape, to predict their reactions, to know which words will comfort and which will wound, all while maintaining a certain distance, a certain clarity that emotional involvement would cloud. In most people, these three types of empathy work together, creating a balanced approach to human connection. But in the Neo-Machiavellian, cognitive empathy has been developed to an extraordinary degree, while emotional empathy remains curiously underdeveloped. They can read you like a book written in a language only they can fully understand, but they do not feel the weight of your chapters. They do not carry your story in their bones. They simply know it, use it, and when necessary, rewrite it to serve their purposes. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like psychopathy, like sociopathy, like one of those clinical terms we use to describe people without conscience. But that would be too simple, too clean, too easy to identify and avoid. The Neo-Machiavellian is not without conscience. They have one. They simply have a different relationship with it. They have learned, through experience or necessity, or some combination of both, that survival in this world requires a certain flexibility of morals, a certain willingness to do what must be done, to wear whatever mask the situation demands. They are not born this way, though some may have predispositions. They are made, shaped by a world that rewards manipulation and punishes vulnerability, by relationships that taught them that trust is a liability and emotional exposure is a wound waiting to happen. Let us return to Elena and Marcus. The conversation continues. Marcus is now telling Elena about his current struggles, about a business partnership that is failing, about money he has invested that seems to be disappearing, about a friend, let us call him David, who Marcus suspects is not being entirely honest with him. Elena listens with that same focused attention, and when Marcus finishes, she is quiet for a moment. The silence stretches, becomes almost uncomfortable, and then she speaks. Her voice is soft, almost reluctant, as if what she is about to say pains her to admit. She tells Marcus that she knows David. Not well, but they have mutual acquaintances. She tells Marcus that she has heard things, rumors really, nothing concrete, but troubling nonetheless. She says she did not want to mention it because she knows how much David means to Marcus, how long they have been friends. But given what Marcus has just shared, she feels she must speak. She tells him that David has a history, a pattern of behavior that Marcus should know about. She provides just enough detail to be credible, but not so much that it can be easily verified. She watches Marcus's face as she speaks, noting the moment when doubt enters his eyes, the instant when trust begins to crack. What Marcus does not know is that Elena has her own interests in his business. She has been positioning herself for months, building trust, establishing herself as a confidant, waiting for the right moment to drive a wedge between Marcus and David. Because with David out of the picture, Marcus will need a new partner, someone he trusts, someone who has been there for him during his darkest moments. Someone like Elena. This is the long game, the patient cultivation of influence that defines Neo-Machiavellian strategy. It is not about immediate gratification or obvious manipulation. It is about planting seeds that will grow into dependencies, about creating situations where the target believes they are making free choices, when in reality, every option has been carefully curated. The brilliance of this approach is its invisibility. If you were to ask Marcus whether Elena has ever manipulated him, he would be offended by the suggestion. Elena is his friend, perhaps his closest friend. She has been there for him, listened to him, supported him. She has never asked for anything in return, never pushed her own agenda. Except she has. Every conversation has been a negotiation. Every moment of apparent vulnerability on her part has been calculated to elicit reciprocal vulnerability from him. Every piece of advice has been designed to move him closer to decisions that benefit her. But because she has wrapped these manipulations in the language of care, in the gestures of friendship, in the performance of empathy, They are invisible to him. He cannot see the strings because they are made of the same material as genuine connection. This is the essence of neo-Machiavellianism. It is Machiavelli's principles updated for the modern age, refined by contemporary psychology, disguised in the vocabulary of emotional intelligence. The original Machiavelli wrote about power in political terms, about princes and states, and the ruthless calculations required to maintain control. He was honest about the brutality of power, about the necessity of appearing virtuous, while being willing to act viciously when required. But he wrote in a time when power was obvious, when it wore crowns and commanded armies. Today, power is more subtle. It operates in boardrooms and bedrooms, in friendships and family dynamics, in the quiet moments when someone convinces you that their interests are your interests, that their vision is your vision, that the cage they are building around you is actually a home. The neo-Machiavellian understands this shift. They know that in a world that values emotional intelligence, the appearance of empathy is more powerful than any traditional display of dominance. They know that people will resist obvious control, but will walk willingly into subtle influence. They know that the best way to get someone to do what you want is to make them believe it was their idea all along. And they know, perhaps most importantly, that the key to all of this is understanding human psychology at a level that most people never achieve, not because they lack the intelligence, but because they lack the willingness to see human connection as a game to be won rather than an experience to be shared. Let us examine another scene, another mask, another performance. This time, the setting is different. It is a family dinner, the kind that happens every Sunday, where 3 generations gather around a table that has witnessed decades of joy and conflict, love and resentment, connection and profound loneliness. At the head of the table sits a man we will call Richard. He is in his 60s, successful by conventional measures, wealthy, respected in his community, a patriarch in the traditional sense. His children are grown, scattered across the country, but they return for these dinners out of obligation that they tell themselves is love. Richard is speaking, telling a story about his youth, about struggles and sacrifices, about building something from nothing. His children have heard this story before, many times, but they listen with expressions of interest because to do otherwise would be to invite conflict, and they are tired, so tired of conflict. But watch Richard's daughter, the middle child, the one we will call Sarah. She is listening differently than her siblings. Her attention is not the glazed politeness of familial duty. It is sharp, focused, analytical. She is noting the pauses in her father's speech, the moments when his voice softens with genuine emotion versus the moments when it hardens with performative strength. She is cataloging these observations, adding them to a mental file she has been building for years. When Richard finishes his story, Sarah speaks. She does not contradict him or challenge him. Instead, she affirms him, but in a very specific way. She mentions a detail from the story, something small that Richard included almost as an aside, and she expands on it. She tells him that she has been thinking about that particular struggle he mentioned, about how it must have shaped his view of loyalty, of trust, of what it means to be reliable. She speaks with admiration, with what appears to be genuine respect, and Richard's face softens. He looks at Sarah with something like gratitude, like recognition. Finally, someone who understands. Finally, a child who sees what he has done, who appreciates the weight he has carried. But Sarah is not finished. She transitions smoothly, almost imperceptibly, from affirmation to suggestion. She mentions that she has been thinking about her own career, about an opportunity that has presented itself, but it would require capital, investment risk. She does not ask directly. She simply presents the information, framed in the language of the values Richard just expressed in his story. She talks about building something, about sacrifice, about the kind of loyalty and reliability that Richard clearly values. She is holding up a mirror, showing Richard a reflection of himself in her ambitions, and in that mirror, supporting her becomes not just a financial decision, but an affirmation of his own principles, his own legacy. This is mirroring, one of the most powerful tools in the neo-Machiavellian arsenal. It is the ability to reflect back to someone their own values, their own language, their own self-image, creating a sense of recognition and alignment that bypasses rational analysis. When done skillfully, The target does not feel manipulated. They feel understood. They feel that rare and precious sensation of being truly seen by another human being. And in that moment of feeling seen, they become vulnerable in ways they would never consciously choose. Sarah learned this technique not from a book or a seminar, but from necessity. She grew up in a household where love was conditional, where approval had to be earned through performance, where emotional needs were dismissed as weakness. She learned early that direct requests were denied, but indirect suggestions, properly framed, could be successful. She learned that her father responded not to vulnerability but to strength, not to need but to ambition that mirrored his own. She learned to read the room, to adjust her presentation, to become whoever she needed to be to get what she needed to survive. And somewhere along the way, these survival strategies became her personality. Or perhaps they revealed a personality that was always there, waiting for permission to emerge. This is a crucial point to understand about neo-Machiavellianism. It is not always a conscious choice. Many people who exhibit these traits do not think of themselves as manipulative. They think of themselves as adaptable, as socially intelligent, as good at reading people. They have narratives that justify their behavior, stories they tell themselves about why their actions are necessary, even noble. Sarah, for instance, might tell herself that she is simply being strategic, that in a world where resources are limited and competition is fierce, you have to be smart about how you present yourself. She might point out that she is not lying to her father, not really. She does value the things he values. She is simply emphasizing certain aspects of herself and downplaying others. She is curating her presentation, which is something everyone does to some degree. And she would not be entirely wrong. We all curate our presentations to some degree. We all adjust our behavior based on social context. The difference is one of degree and intention. Most people curate to fit in, to avoid conflict, to maintain social harmony. The neo-Machiavellian curates to control, to influence, to achieve specific outcomes that benefit them, often at the expense of others. Most people feel guilt or discomfort when they manipulate, even in small ways. The neo-Machiavellian has either suppressed that guilt or reframed it as unnecessary sentimentality, a weakness that would only hinder their effectiveness. Let us talk about guilt for a moment, because it is central to understanding this phenomenon. Guilt is a social emotion, one that evolved to help us maintain relationships and cooperate with others. When we harm someone, guilt motivates us to make amends, to repair the relationship, to avoid similar harm in the future. It is an internal regulatory system, a conscience that keeps our self-interest in check. But guilt only works if we allow ourselves to fully recognize the harm we have caused, to sit with the discomfort of knowing we have hurt someone, to feel the weight of their pain as if it were our own. The neo-Machiavellian has developed sophisticated mechanisms to avoid this recognition. They might rationalize their behavior, telling themselves that the target deserved it, or that everyone does it, or that the ends justify the means. They might compartmentalize, separating their actions from their self-image, maintaining a narrative of themselves as good people who sometimes have to make hard choices. They might intellectualize, analyzing their behavior in abstract terms that strip away the emotional reality of what they have done. Or they might simply not think about it at all, moving on to the next target, the next manipulation, the next performance, never pausing long enough for guilt to catch up with them. But here's what is fascinating and perhaps tragic about this pattern. The mechanisms that protect the neo-Machiavellian from guilt also protect them from genuine connection. By maintaining that emotional distance, by treating relationships as strategic rather than authentic, they ensure that they will never be truly known by another person. They will be admired, perhaps. They will be needed, certainly. They will be successful in achieving their goals. But they will never experience the profound vulnerability and trust that characterizes deep human connection. They will never know what it feels like to be loved, not for the mask they wear, but for the face beneath it, because they have worn the mask for so long that they may no longer remember what that face looks like. Consider another scenario, this time in the context of romantic relationships, where neo-Machiavellian traits can be particularly devastating. Meet James and Rebecca. They have been together for 2 years, living together for 6 months. To outside observers, they seem like an ideal couple. James is attentive, thoughtful, always remembering the small details that matter to Rebecca. He knows how she takes her coffee, knows that she needs silence in the morning and conversation in the evening, knows that when she is stressed, she likes to go for long walks alone. He accommodates all of this, adjusts his own rhythms to match hers, and Rebecca feels cherished in a way she has never experienced before. But there is something Rebecca has begun to notice, though she cannot quite articulate it yet. It is a feeling, a sense that something is slightly off, like a picture hanging at an imperceptible angle that nonetheless creates a subtle discomfort. She notices that James never seems to need anything from her. He is always the one providing support, always the one listening, always the one adjusting. At first, this felt like a gift, like she had finally found someone who was not needy or demanding. But increasingly, it feels like a wall, like James is performing the role of perfect partner without ever letting her see who he actually is beneath the performance. When Rebecca tries to talk to James about this, he is understanding. Of course he is understanding. He listens to her concerns with that focused attention she has come to recognize, and he acknowledges her feelings. He tells her that she is right, that he has been holding back, that he struggles with vulnerability because of his past. He shares a story from his childhood, something painful and personal, and Rebecca feels guilty for doubting him. She feels like she has been unfair, like she has been looking for problems where none exist. James holds her as she apologizes, and she does not see the small smile that crosses his face, the satisfaction of a performance well executed. What Rebecca does not understand yet is that James has shared that childhood story before, with other partners, in other relationships. It is a carefully selected piece of vulnerability, painful enough to seem genuine, but not so painful that it actually costs him anything to share. It is a tool, a way to create the appearance of openness while maintaining complete control. James learned long ago that people are more comfortable with you when they believe they know your weaknesses, when they think they have seen you at your most vulnerable. So he gives them that, a curated vulnerability, a strategic exposure that actually serves to deepen his control rather than diminish it. This is one of the most insidious aspects of neo-Machiavellian behavior in intimate relationships. It mimics genuine intimacy so closely that it can be almost impossible to distinguish from the real thing, especially in the early stages. The neo-Machiavellian knows all the right moves, says all the right things, creates all the right feelings. They have studied what people want in relationships, and they deliver it with precision. But it is a delivery, a performance, not an authentic sharing of self. And over time, this creates a peculiar kind of loneliness in their partners, a sense of being close to someone who is somehow always just out of reach. Rebecca will eventually leave James, though it will take her another year to build up the courage and clarity to do so. She will struggle to explain to friends and family why she is ending what appears to be a good relationship. She will say things like, "I just never felt like I really knew him," or "it was like living with a very considerate stranger." People will not understand. They will point out all the ways James was good to her, all the things he did right. And Rebecca will not be able to articulate what was missing, because what was missing was something invisible, something that should have been there but never was. Authenticity, genuine reciprocal vulnerability, the willingness to be truly known and potentially rejected for who you actually are rather than admired for who you pretend to be. Now, let us step back and examine the broader implications of neo-Machiavellianism in society. We are living in an age that valorizes certain traits that align perfectly with neo-Machiavellian tendencies. We celebrate emotional intelligence, which in its healthy form is about understanding and managing emotions in yourself and others, but which can be weaponized into manipulation. We celebrate confidence, which can mask narcissism. We celebrate ambition, which can justify ruthlessness. We celebrate adaptability, which can excuse a lack of authentic self. We celebrate networking, which can become transactional relationship building, where every connection is evaluated for its utility rather than its intrinsic value. Social media has amplified these tendencies exponentially. We are all performing now, all curating our presentations, all managing our personal brands. We have learned to think of ourselves as products to be marketed, relationships as networks to be leveraged, experiences as content to be shared. In this environment, The line between healthy self-presentation and manipulative performance has become increasingly blurred. The neo-Machiavellian thrives in this landscape because they are simply doing consciously and strategically what everyone else is doing unconsciously and haphazardly. Consider the corporate world, where neo-Machiavellian traits are often rewarded and even cultivated. The ability to read people, to influence without appearing to manipulate, to build strategic alliances, to present yourself as whatever the situation requires. These are considered leadership skills. Business schools teach courses on emotional intelligence and influence. Self-help books promise to teach you how to win friends and influence people, how to get to yes, how to negotiate anything. And while these skills can be used ethically, they can also be used to exploit, to control, to advance at the expense of others. The successful corporate neo-Machiavellian knows how to navigate office politics with surgical precision. They know who has power and who wants power. They know how to align themselves with the former and use the latter. They know how to take credit for successes and deflect blame for failures. They know how to appear collaborative while actually being competitive. They know how to make allies feel valued while actually viewing them as pawns. They know how to identify threats and neutralize them before those threats even realize they are in danger. And they do all of this while maintaining a reputation as a team player, as someone who cares about the organization, as a leader who brings out the best in others. Let us meet one such person. His name is Thomas, and he is a senior executive at a mid-sized technology company. Thomas is widely respected. His subordinates speak highly of him. He remembers birthdays, asks about family members by name, takes time to mentor younger employees. He seems genuinely invested in their success. But watch what happens when one of those younger employees, let us call her Jennifer, starts to show real promise, starts to attract attention from upper management, starts to be seen as potential leadership material. Thomas does not attack Jennifer directly. That would be too obvious, too risky. Instead, he begins a subtle campaign of undermining. He praises her publicly, but in ways that damn with faint praise, emphasizing her potential rather than her achievements, her enthusiasm rather than her competence. He gives her high-visibility projects, but ensures they are either impossible to succeed at or easy to take credit for if they do succeed. He positions himself as her mentor and advocate, which gives him access to information about her plans and ambitions, information he then uses to stay one step ahead of her. He identifies her insecurities and, under the guise of helpful feedback, reinforces them. He is always supportive, always encouraging, and somehow Jennifer finds herself feeling less confident, less capable, less certain of her own judgment with each interaction. This is gaslighting in its most sophisticated form. Thomas is not telling Jennifer that her perceptions are wrong. He is shaping her perceptions so subtly that she does not realize they are being shaped. He is creating a reality where she doubts herself, where she second-guesses her instincts, where she becomes dependent on his guidance and approval. And because he does this while appearing to support her, she cannot identify him as the source of her diminishing confidence. She blames herself. She thinks she is not ready, not capable, not strong enough. She never suspects that her mentor is actually her saboteur. This pattern repeats itself throughout Thomas's career. He has left a trail of promising young professionals who somehow never quite lived up to their potential, who burned out or moved on or settled into roles beneath their capabilities. But Thomas's reputation remains untarnished because he is always there, expressing disappointment at their departures, praising their contributions, wishing them well. He is a master of the long game, patient and strategic, never taking unnecessary risks, never revealing his true nature to anyone who might threaten him. But there is a cost to this way of being, even for Thomas. He is successful, wealthy, respected, but he is also profoundly alone. He has a wife who does not really know him, children who sense something false in his affection even if they cannot name it, colleagues who trust him but would abandon him in an instant if they knew what he really was. He has built an empire on sand, on performance and manipulation, and somewhere deep inside, in a place he rarely allows himself to visit, he knows that if the mask ever slips, if people ever see the calculating coldness beneath the warm exterior, everything will collapse. This brings us to a question that sits at the heart of understanding neo-Machiavellianism. Are these people happy? Can they be happy? Or is the pursuit of power and control through manipulation ultimately self-defeating, creating the very isolation and emptiness it is meant to protect against? The answer is complex and perhaps unsatisfying in its ambiguity. Some neo-Machiavellians seem genuinely content with their lives. They do not experience the lack of authentic connection as a loss, because they have never valued authenticity in the first place. They derive satisfaction from success, from winning, from the exercise of influence and control. Their relationships, while not deep in the traditional sense, serve their purposes and provide sufficient social connection to avoid loneliness. But others, perhaps most, experience a nagging sense of emptiness, a feeling that something is missing even as they achieve everything they thought they wanted. They may not be able to identify what is missing because they have spent so long denying the need for genuine connection that they no longer recognize it as a need. They may attribute their dissatisfaction to external factors, always believing that the next achievement, the next conquest, the next successful manipulation will finally bring satisfaction. But it never does, because what they are seeking cannot be found through control. It can only be found through surrender, through the terrifying vulnerability of being truly known, and that is the one thing they cannot allow themselves. There is a particular poignancy to watching a neo-Machiavellian in their later years, when the games have been played and won, when power has been accumulated and exercised, when the masks have been worn for so long that they have fused to the face. They look around and see the fruits of their labor, the success and status and influence, and they feel the hollowness of it all. They see people who love the person they pretend to be, but who would not recognize the person they actually are. They realize that they have spent their entire lives performing and have never given anyone the chance to love them without the performance. And by that point, it may be too late to change, too late to learn vulnerability, too late to build the kind of authentic relationships that require years of trust and reciprocal exposure. Let us consider now the perspective of those who are targeted by neo-Machiavellians, because understanding this dynamic requires examining both sides of the equation. Why do people fall for these manipulations? Why do intelligent, capable individuals find themselves controlled by someone who is, when you strip away the performance, simply using them? The answer lies in the fundamental human need for connection, for understanding, for being seen and valued. We are social creatures, wired for attachment, and we are vulnerable to anyone who can convincingly simulate the experience of genuine connection. The neo-Machiavellian understands this vulnerability and exploits it with precision. They identify what you need, what you are missing, what you long for, and they provide it. If you need validation, they validate you. If you need guidance, they guide you. If you need someone to believe in you, they believe in you. Or at least they perform belief so convincingly that you cannot tell the difference. And in that moment of having your needs met, you become attached. You become invested. You become willing to overlook small inconsistencies, to rationalize behaviors that do not quite fit, to give the benefit of the doubt again and again. This is why neo-Machiavellian manipulation is so difficult to recognize, and even more difficult to escape. It does not feel like manipulation. It feels like connection, like friendship, like love, like mentorship. The target is not being forced or coerced in obvious ways. They are being led, gently and skillfully, to make choices that serve the manipulator's interests, while believing those choices are their own. And when the manipulation is finally recognized, if it ever is, the target often experiences profound shame and self-blame. How could I have been so stupid? How did I not see this? What is wrong with me that I fell for this? But there is nothing wrong with them. They were simply human, with human needs and human vulnerabilities, and they encountered someone who had learned to weaponize empathy, to turn the very mechanisms of connection into tools of control. The fault lies not with the target, but with the manipulator, with the person who chose to use their understanding of human psychology not to build genuine relationships, but to exploit others for personal gain. Yet even this framing, this clear assignment of fault and blame, is perhaps too simple, because many neo-Machiavellians do not see themselves as villains. They see themselves as realists, as people who understand how the world actually works rather than how we wish it would work. They might argue that everyone manipulates to some degree, that all social interaction involves performance and strategy, that they are simply more honest about it, at least with themselves. They might point out that the alternative, being completely authentic and vulnerable at all times, is naive and self-destructive in a competitive world. They might say that they are playing the game that everyone else is playing, just playing it better. And there is a grain of truth in this defense, uncomfortable as it may be to acknowledge. We do all perform to some degree. We do all adjust our presentation based on context. We do all have moments where we are strategic in our interactions, where we say what we think someone wants to hear rather than what we actually think, where we emphasize certain aspects of ourselves and downplay others. The difference is that most people do this occasionally and feel conflicted about it, while the neo-Machiavellian does it constantly and feels justified in doing so. Most people see manipulation as a necessary evil to be minimized, while the neo-Machiavellian sees it as a skill to be perfected. This brings us to one of the most challenging aspects of understanding neo-Machiavellianism, which is that it exists on a spectrum rather than as a binary category. There are not simply manipulators and non-manipulators, neo-Machiavellians and authentic people. There are degrees of these traits in all of us, and the line between healthy social intelligence and manipulative behavior can be blurry. Someone might exhibit neo-Machiavellian traits in their professional life while being relatively authentic in their personal relationships. Someone might be manipulative in moments of stress or threat while being genuine most of the time. Someone might have learned these behaviors as survival mechanisms in childhood and continue using them in adulthood even though they are no longer necessary. This complexity makes it difficult to identify neo-Machiavellians and even more difficult to know how to respond to them. There is no simple test, no checklist of behaviors that definitively identifies someone as a neo-Machiavellian. Instead, there are patterns, tendencies, a constellation of traits that, taken together, suggest someone who relates to others primarily through strategic manipulation rather than authentic connection. They are charming but somehow impersonal. They are attentive, but in a way that feels studied rather than spontaneous. They remember details about you, but those details are deployed strategically rather than shared warmly. They are supportive, but their support always seems to come with invisible strings attached. They create intimacy quickly, but that intimacy never seems to deepen beyond a certain point. They are always performing, always on, and you never quite feel like you have seen them with their guard down. If you recognize these patterns in someone in your life, what do? The answer depends on the nature of the relationship and your own needs and boundaries. In some cases, particularly in professional contexts, it may be possible to maintain a relationship with a neo-Machiavellian as long as you are aware of the dynamic and protect yourself accordingly. You can appreciate their skills and insights while not becoming emotionally dependent on them. You can engage with them strategically, matching their level of authenticity, which is to say, maintaining a professional distance. You can benefit from the relationship while not expecting it to provide genuine emotional connection. But in intimate relationships, in friendships, in family dynamics, the calculation is different. These relationships require vulnerability, trust, reciprocal care, and authentic connection to be truly satisfying. A relationship with a neo-Machiavellian may provide certain benefits, may even appear functional from the outside, but it will always lack the depth and authenticity that characterize healthy, intimate relationships. And over time, this lack will erode your sense of self, your trust in your own perceptions, your capacity for genuine connection with others. In these contexts, the healthiest choice is often to create distance or end the relationship entirely, as painful as that may be. But what if you recognize these patterns not in someone else but in yourself? What if you are reading this and seeing your own behaviors reflected back at you? What if you are the one who has learned to weaponize empathy, to perform connection, to manipulate others while telling yourself it is necessary or justified? This recognition can be profoundly unsettling, but it is also the first step toward change, if change is what you want. The path away from neo-Machiavellian patterns is not easy. It requires confronting the fears and wounds that led to these behaviors in the first place. It requires developing the capacity for genuine empathy, not just cognitive understanding, but emotional resonance with others. It requires learning to tolerate vulnerability, to sit with the discomfort of being truly known, to risk rejection for who you actually are rather than admiration for who you pretend to be. It requires rebuilding your relationship with guilt, allowing yourself to feel the weight of harm you have caused rather than rationalizing it away. It requires, fundamentally, a shift in how you view relationships, from transactions to be managed to experiences to be shared, from games to be won to connections to be nurtured. This transformation is possible, but it requires sustained effort and often professional help. A skilled therapist can help you understand the origins of your neo-Machiavellian patterns, can teach you healthier ways of relating to others, can support you as you practice vulnerability and authenticity. But the therapist cannot do the work for you. You must be willing to examine yourself honestly, to acknowledge the harm you have caused, to commit to change even when it is uncomfortable and uncertain. You must be willing to accept that you may lose some relationships in the process, that people who were attached to the mask may not be interested in the face beneath it. You must be willing to start over, to build new relationships on a foundation of authenticity rather than manipulation. And here is what is both terrifying and liberating about this process. When you stop performing, when you allow yourself to be genuinely known, you discover whether anyone will love the real you. For someone who has spent their life controlling how others perceive them, this is the ultimate loss of control, the ultimate vulnerability. But it is also the only path to genuine connection, to relationships that nourish rather than deplete, to a sense of self that is stable rather than contingent on constant performance. It is the difference between being admired and being loved, between being needed and being wanted, between having a network and having a community. Let us return one final time to our cast of characters and see where their stories have led them. Elena, who manipulated Marcus into replacing his business partner with her, achieved her goal. She is now a successful entrepreneur, wealthy and influential. But she is also alone in ways that are becoming harder to ignore. Her relationships are numerous but shallow. People seek her out for her connections and insights, but no one really knows her. She has begun to notice a pattern in her life, a cycle of initial excitement in new relationships, followed by gradual disillusionment and distance. She tells herself it is because other people are disappointing, because they do not live up to her standards, because genuine connection is rare. She does not yet see that she is the common factor, that she is creating the very isolation she fears. Sarah, who learned to mirror her father to gain his approval and support, has built a successful career using the same techniques. She is skilled at reading people, at becoming what they need her to be, at navigating complex social and professional dynamics. But she has reached a point where she no longer knows who she is beneath the performance. When she is alone, when there is no one to perform for, she feels empty, undefined, like a mirror with nothing to reflect. She has begun therapy, tentatively exploring the possibility of authenticity, but it is terrifying. Without the mask, who is she? Does she even exist? James, who performed perfect partnership while maintaining complete emotional control, has moved on to a new relationship after Rebecca left him. He is doing the same things, playing the same role, and his new partner is falling for it just as Rebecca did. But something has shifted in James. Rebecca's departure affected him in ways he did not expect. For the first time, he is questioning his patterns, wondering what it would be like to actually let someone in, to be vulnerable in a way that is not strategic. He has not acted on these questions yet. The old patterns are too ingrained, too comfortable, too effective. But the questions are there, a small crack in a mask, and through that crack, something like genuine feeling is beginning to seep through. Richard, the patriarch who valued strength over vulnerability, is dying. He has months, perhaps a year, and he is surrounded by family who perform love out of obligation. He can feel the performance, can sense the distance, and he is realizing too late that he created this distance, that his own inability to be vulnerable, to show weakness, to ask for help, has resulted in a family that respects him but does not truly love him. He wants to change this, wants to have real conversations, wants to tell his children that he loves them not for what they achieve, but for who they are. But he does not know how. The language of authentic emotion is foreign to him, and his children do not trust it when he tries. They think it is the illness talking, or fear of death, or manipulation of a different kind. The walls he built are too high to scale in the time he has left. Thomas, the corporate executive who sabotaged promising young professionals, has reached the pinnacle of his career. He is being considered for a CEO position, the culmination of decades of strategic maneuvering. But the vetting process is thorough, and investigators are talking to people from throughout his career. Patterns are emerging. Stories are being shared. People who were afraid to speak up while he had power over them are finding their voices now. His reputation, so carefully cultivated, is beginning to crack. He may still get the position. His skills are undeniable, but the cost of his methods is becoming visible. And even if he succeeds, even if he becomes CEO, he is beginning to suspect that it will not bring the satisfaction he has been chasing. Because what he has been chasing was never really about the position. It was about proving something, filling something, escaping something, and no amount of external success can address an internal void. These stories do not have neat endings because life does not have neat endings. The neo-Machiavellian does not always face consequences. Sometimes they succeed, thrive, die wealthy and respected, never experiencing the reckoning we might wish for them. Sometimes their targets never recognize the manipulation, never escape, never heal. Sometimes the patterns continue across generations, children learning from parents that love is conditional, that vulnerability is weakness, that relationships are transactions, and the cycle perpetuates itself. But sometimes there are moments of recognition, of choice, of change. Sometimes the neo-Machiavellian reaches a point where the cost of the mask becomes unbearable and they choose to remove it. Consequences be damned. Sometimes the target recognizes the manipulation and finds the strength to leave, to heal, to build healthier relationships. Sometimes the patterns are interrupted, the cycle is broken, and something new becomes possible. These moments are rare and difficult and require tremendous courage, but they happen. They are happening right now. Somewhere, someone is choosing authenticity over control, vulnerability over performance, genuine connection over strategic manipulation. And this brings us to the question of why any of this matters, why we should care about understanding neo-Machiavellianism, why it is worth examining these dark corners of human behavior. It matters because these patterns are not rare. They are not confined to clinical populations or extreme cases. They exist on a spectrum, and most of us will encounter them, in others or in ourselves, at some point in our lives. Understanding these patterns gives us the tools to recognize them, to protect ourselves, to make informed choices about our relationships. It allows us to distinguish between genuine connection and skilled performance, between healthy influence and manipulative control, between someone who understands you and someone who is studying you. More importantly, understanding neo-Machiavellianism helps us understand ourselves. It forces us to examine our own behaviors, our own motivations, our own relationships. It asks us to consider where we fall on the spectrum between authenticity and performance, between genuine empathy and strategic understanding, between connection and control. It challenges us to be honest about the ways we manipulate, even in small ways, even with good intentions, and to consider whether those manipulations serve our relationships or undermine them. It invites us to imagine what our lives might look like if we chose vulnerability over control, if we risked being truly known rather than strategically admired. This is not comfortable work. It requires looking at aspects of ourselves and others that we would prefer to ignore. It requires acknowledging that people we love might be manipulating us, or that we might be manipulating people we love. It requires sitting with ambiguity, with the reality that most people are neither purely authentic nor purely manipulative, but some complex mixture of both. It requires accepting that there are no simple answers, no easy ways to identify and avoid neo-Machiavellians, no guaranteed paths to authentic connection. But discomfort is often the price of growth, and understanding is always preferable to ignorance, even when that understanding is painful. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we move forward in a world where empathy can be weaponized, where connection can be performance, where the people who seem to understand us best might be the ones using that understanding against us? We start by developing our own emotional intelligence, not the kind that is about manipulating others, but the kind that is about understanding ourselves. We learn to recognize our own needs and vulnerabilities so that we are less susceptible to those who would exploit them. We practice discernment, paying attention not just to what people say and do, but to the patterns over time, to the consistency between words and actions, to the feeling we have in their presence. We trust our instincts when something feels off, even if we cannot articulate exactly what is wrong. We also practice authenticity in our own relationships, not as a naive rejection of all social performance, but as a conscious choice to prioritize genuine connection over strategic advantage. We allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to share our true thoughts and feelings, to risk rejection for who we actually are. We notice when we are performing and ask ourselves why, what we are afraid will happen if we stop. We work on developing genuine empathy, the kind that involves actually feeling with others rather than just understanding them intellectually. We practice compassion for others and for ourselves, recognizing that we are all doing our best to navigate a complex social world with imperfect tools and incomplete information. We build relationships slowly, allowing trust to develop over time, rather than rushing into intimacy with people who create instant connection. We pay attention to reciprocity, to whether the relationship involves mutual vulnerability and support, or whether we are always the one sharing, while the other person remains mysteriously opaque. We notice whether someone's empathy feels warm and spontaneous or studied and strategic. We observe how people treat others, particularly those who have no power or utility, because that reveals character in ways that treatment of equals or superiors does not. We watch for consistency, for alignment between public and private behavior, for evidence that someone's values are genuine rather than performed. And perhaps most importantly, we create space in our lives for genuine connection, for relationships that are not transactional, for communities that value authenticity over performance. We seek out people who are willing to be vulnerable, who admit their mistakes, who show their imperfections, who do not always have the right answer or the perfect response. We cultivate friendships that feel easy rather than effortful, where we can be ourselves without constant self-monitoring, where silence is comfortable rather than strategic. We build lives that are rich in meaning and connection rather than just achievement and status, because it is in that richness that we find protection against manipulation. When our needs for belonging and understanding are met through genuine relationships, we are less vulnerable to those who would exploit those needs. This does not mean we become paranoid or suspicious, constantly analyzing every interaction for signs of manipulation. That would be exhausting and would prevent us from forming any relationships at all. Instead, we develop a kind of relaxed awareness, ability to enjoy and engage with people while maintaining a part of ourselves that observes and evaluates. We give people the benefit of the doubt, while also paying attention to patterns over time. We are open to connection while also protecting our boundaries. We are compassionate toward others, while also being realistic about human nature. We accept that we will sometimes be fooled, sometimes be manipulated, sometimes trust the wrong people, and we forgive ourselves for these inevitable mistakes while learning from them. The theater of human behavior is complex and endlessly fascinating. We are all actors to some degree, all wearing masks, all performing roles. The question is not whether we perform, but why we perform, what we hope to achieve through our performances, and whether those performances serve connection or prevent it. The neo-Machiavellian has chosen to make performance their primary mode of relating, to prioritize control over connection, to weaponize empathy rather than share it. This choice may bring them success, power, influence, but it comes at a cost that many of them do not recognize until it is too late. The cost is authenticity, genuine connection, the experience of being truly known and loved for who they actually are rather than who they pretend to be. For the rest of us, the challenge is to navigate this theater with wisdom and discernment, to appreciate the performances while not mistaking them for reality, to engage with others strategically when necessary while preserving space for authentic connection. It is to recognize that empathy, like any powerful tool, can be used to build or to destroy, to connect or to control, to heal or to harm. The difference lies not in the tool itself, but in the intention behind its use and the consciousness with which it is wielded. As we close this exploration, consider the masks you wear. Consider the performances you give. Consider the moments when you have used your understanding of others to influence rather than to connect, to control rather than to support. Consider also the moments when you have been the target of such manipulation, when someone's empathy felt slightly off, when connection felt more like performance than genuine sharing. These considerations are not meant to induce guilt or paranoia, but to increase awareness, to help you make more conscious choices about how you relate to others and how you allow others to relate to you. The mask is neither good nor bad in itself. It is a tool, a protection, a way of navigating social complexity. We all need masks sometimes, need to present ourselves strategically, need to protect our vulnerabilities from those who might exploit them. The danger comes when the mask becomes permanent, when we forget we are wearing it, when we lose touch with the face beneath. The danger comes when we use our masks not to protect ourselves, but to exploit others, when we weaponize empathy, when we turn connection into a game of control and domination. There is another way. It is harder, riskier, more vulnerable, but also more rewarding. It is the way of authentic connection, of genuine empathy, of relationships built on mutual vulnerability and trust rather than strategic manipulation. It is the way of removing the mask, at least with some people, at least some of the time, and allowing yourself to be truly seen. It is the way of using your understanding of human psychology not to control others, but to connect with them more deeply, to support them more effectively, to build relationships that nourish rather than deplete. It is the way of recognizing that true power comes not from controlling others, but from being so secure in yourself that you do not need to control others, that you can allow them their autonomy, their choices, their own paths, while still maintaining connection. This path requires courage. It requires the willingness to be hurt, to be rejected, to be misunderstood. It requires accepting that not everyone will appreciate your authenticity, that some people will prefer the mask, that vulnerability will sometimes be exploited rather than honored. But it also offers something that manipulation can never provide, which is the experience of being genuinely known and genuinely loved, of having relationships that are based on who you actually are rather than who you pretend to be, of building a life that feels authentic rather than performed. The choice is yours. You can continue to perfect your masks, to refine your performances, to use your understanding of human psychology to control and manipulate. You will likely be successful. You will likely achieve your goals. You will likely be admired and respected and influential. But you will also be alone in ways that success cannot remedy, isolated behind walls of your own construction, forever performing, forever controlling, forever wondering what it might feel like to be truly known. Or you can choose differently. You can choose to risk authenticity, to practice genuine empathy, to build relationships based on mutual vulnerability and trust. You will likely be hurt sometimes. You will likely be disappointed. You will likely face rejection and misunderstanding. But you will also experience connection in its deepest form, love in its truest sense, and a life that feels real rather than performed. Neither choice is easy. Both involve risk and sacrifice, but only one offers the possibility of genuine fulfillment, of relationships that nourish your soul rather than just serve your interests, of a self that is stable and authentic rather than contingent and performed. Only one allows you to remove the mask and discover that beneath it, you are enough. You are worthy. You are lovable not for what you can do or how you can perform, but simply for who you are. This is the promise and the challenge of moving beyond neo-Machiavellianism, of choosing connection over control, of allowing empathy to be a bridge rather than a weapon. The stage is set. The curtain is rising. The performance is about to begin. But this time, you have a choice. You can play the role you have always played, wear the mask you have always worn, manipulate and control and achieve and remain fundamentally alone. Or you can step off the stage, remove the mask, and risk the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of being truly seen. The choice, as always, is yours. But now, at least, you are making it with awareness, with understanding, with knowledge of what you are choosing and what you are giving up. And that awareness, that consciousness, is the first step toward freedom, toward authenticity, toward a life lived not behind a mask, but in the full, vulnerable, beautiful reality of who you actually are. In the quiet moments, when performances end and the masks come off, when you are alone with yourself and there is no one to impress or manipulate or control, who are you? This is the question that haunts the neo-Machiavellian, the question they spend their lives avoiding, the question that becomes more insistent with each passing year. Because beneath all the strategy and manipulation, beneath all the performances and masks, there is still a human being, still someone with needs and fears and longings, still someone who wants to be loved and understood and accepted. The tragedy of neo-Machiavellianism is not that these people are monsters, but that they are human beings who have learned to protect themselves in ways that ultimately prevent them from getting what they most deeply need. Consider the child who learned that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned, that vulnerability was punished. That child developed strategies to survive, to get their needs met in an environment that was not safe for authentic expression. They learned to read people, to perform, to manipulate, because these skills were necessary for survival. And those skills worked. They got the child through a difficult situation. But then the child grew up, and the situation changed, but the strategies remained. The adult continues to use the tools that the child developed, even though those tools are no longer necessary, even though they now prevent rather than enable connection. This is the origin story of many neo-Machiavellians. Not evil but adaptation, not malice but survival, not choice but necessity that became habit that became identity. Understanding this origin does not excuse the harm that neo-Machiavellians cause. It does not make their manipulation acceptable or their victim's pain less real. But it does complicate the simple narrative of villain and victim, of bad people doing bad things. It reveals that neo-Machiavellianism is often a wound masquerading as a strength, a defense mechanism that has outlived its usefulness, a solution that has become a problem. And this understanding opens the possibility of change, of healing, of transformation. Because if neo-Machiavellian patterns are learned, they can be unlearned. If they developed as adaptations to specific circumstances, they can be adapted again when circumstances change. If they are strategies rather than essential nature, they can be replaced with different strategies, healthier strategies, strategies that serve connection rather than control. But this change requires something that is extraordinarily difficult for the neo-Machiavellian, which is the willingness to be vulnerable, to admit that their strategies are not working, to acknowledge the harm they have caused, to ask for help. It requires them to do the very thing they have spent their lives avoiding, which is to remove the mask and risk being seen in their weakness, their confusion, their pain. It requires them to trust, which is perhaps the hardest thing of all for someone who has learned that trust is dangerous, that vulnerability is weakness, that other people will exploit any opening you give them. Yet some do make this choice. Some reach a point where the cost of the mask becomes unbearable, where the loneliness becomes too acute to ignore, where the emptiness of their achievements becomes impossible to deny. They reach out, tentatively, fearfully, to a therapist or a trusted friend or a support group. They begin the slow, painful work of examining their patterns, understanding their origins, developing new ways of relating. They practice vulnerability in small doses, testing whether the world will punish them for it as they fear. They discover, often to their surprise, that vulnerability can be met with compassion, that authenticity can be valued, that people might actually prefer the real them to the performed version. This discovery is both liberating and terrifying, because it means that all those years of performance were unnecessary, that they could have been loved all along if they had only been willing to be seen. The journey from neo-Machiavellianism to authenticity is not linear. There are setbacks and relapses, moments when the old patterns reassert themselves, times when the fear becomes overwhelming and the mask goes back on. But each time the mask is removed, even briefly, it becomes a little easier. Each experience of genuine connection makes the performance feel a little more hollow. Each moment of being truly seen and accepted chips away at the belief that the mask is necessary for survival. Slowly, painfully, gradually, a new way of being becomes possible. Not perfect, not without struggle, but more authentic, more connected, more alive. For those who have been harmed by neo-Machiavellians, the path is different but equally challenging. They must learn to trust again after having their trust exploited. They must learn to recognize genuine connection after being fooled by skilled performance. They must learn to value their own perceptions after being gaslit and manipulated. They must learn to set boundaries after having their boundaries systematically violated. They must learn to forgive themselves for being human, for having needs and vulnerabilities, for trusting someone who used that trust against them. This is hard work, often requiring professional support, always requiring time and patience and self-compassion. But healing is possible. People do recover from manipulative relationships. They do learn to trust again, to connect again, to love again. They do develop the discernment to recognize manipulation and the strength to walk away from it. They do build lives rich in authentic connection, surrounded by people who value them for who they actually are rather than what they can provide. The scars remain, the lessons are learned, but the wound does not have to define them. They can emerge from the experience wiser, stronger, more compassionate, both toward themselves and toward others who have been similarly harmed. And so we return to where we began, to the theater of human behavior, to the masks we wear and the performances we give. We have explored the dark side of empathy, the ways it can be weaponized and used for control rather than connection. We have met people who have perfected this weaponization and people who have been harmed by it. We have examined the origins of neo-Machiavellian patterns and the cost they exact, both on those who employ them and those who are targeted by them. We have considered the possibility of change, of healing, of moving from performance to authenticity, from control to connection, from manipulation to genuine empathy. The knowledge you now possess cannot be unlearned. You will see these patterns everywhere, in others and perhaps in yourself. You will recognize the performances, spot the manipulations, feel the subtle wrongness of strategic empathy. This awareness may be uncomfortable, may make you question relationships you thought were solid, may force you to confront aspects of yourself you would prefer to ignore. But it is also empowering. It gives you the tools to protect yourself, to make informed choices, to build relationships that are genuine rather than performed. It allows you to distinguish between people who understand you and people who are studying you, between those who use empathy to connect and those who use it to control. Use this knowledge wisely. Do not become paranoid or cynical, seeing manipulation in every interaction. Most people are doing their best to navigate a complex social world with imperfect tools. Most people are neither purely authentic nor purely manipulative, but some mixture of both, performing when they feel they must and being genuine when they feel safe to do so. Give people the benefit of the doubt while also paying attention to patterns over time. Trust your instincts while also being willing to be surprised. Protect your boundaries while also remaining open to connection. Be discerning without being closed, aware without being suspicious, wise without being cynical. And remember that you have a choice in how you use your own understanding of human psychology. You can use it to manipulate, to control, to achieve your goals at the expense of others. Or you can use it to connect more deeply, to support more effectively, to build relationships that are mutually nourishing rather than exploitative. You can perfect your mask and live behind it forever, achieving success but never experiencing genuine intimacy. Or you can risk removing the mask, at least with some people, at least some of the time, and discover what it feels like to be truly known and truly loved. The choice is yours, and it is a choice you will make not once but repeatedly, in countless small moments throughout your life. The world needs both kinds of intelligence, both strategic awareness and authentic connection. We need to be able to navigate complex social situations, to protect ourselves from those who would exploit us, to recognize manipulation and respond to it effectively. But we also need to be able to love and be loved, to trust and be trusted, to connect with others in ways that are genuine and mutually nourishing. The challenge is to develop both capacities without allowing one to overwhelm the other, to be strategic when necessary without becoming manipulative, to be authentic when possible without becoming naive. This balance is not easy to achieve. It requires constant awareness, constant adjustment, constant choice. It requires us to be honest with ourselves about our motivations, to examine our behaviors and their impacts, to take responsibility for the harm we cause even when it was not our intention. It requires us to be compassionate with ourselves when we fall short, to recognize that we are all learning, all growing, all doing our best with the tools and understanding we have. It requires us to extend that same compassion to others, to recognize that even those who harm us are often acting from their own wounds, their own fears, their own limited understanding. This compassion does not mean accepting harmful behavior or remaining in toxic relationships. It does not mean excusing manipulation or tolerating abuse. It means understanding the human complexity behind the behavior while still holding people accountable for their choices and their impacts. It means recognizing that people can change while also accepting that they may not, and making decisions based on their actual behavior rather than their potential. It means hoping for the best while preparing for the worst, trusting while also verifying, loving while also protecting yourself. In the end, the question is not whether to wear masks, but which masks to wear and when. Not whether to perform, but what we are performing and why. Not whether to use our understanding of human psychology, but how we use it and to what end. These are questions without simple answers, questions that require ongoing reflection and adjustment, questions that each of us must answer for ourselves based on our values, our experiences, our understanding of what makes a life worth living. But they are questions worth asking, worth sitting with, worth allowing to shape how we move through the world and how we relate to the people in it. La historia continúa. There is a moment that comes to everyone who has lived behind a mask for long enough, a moment of reckoning when the performance becomes unbearable and the question can no longer be avoided. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when there is no role to play, no impression to make, no outcome to achieve? This moment can come at any time, triggered by loss or illness, or simply the accumulation of years spent performing. It can be gentle or devastating, gradual or sudden, but it always carries the same essential question. Is this all there is? Is this performance, this achievement, this carefully constructed life, is this enough? For the neo-Machiavellian, this moment is particularly acute because they have invested so much in the performance, have built their entire identity around their ability to read and manipulate others, have measured their worth by their success in achieving their goals. To question the performance is to question everything, to risk discovering that beneath the mask there is nothing, or worse, that there is something but it has been neglected for so long that it is barely recognizable. This is the existential crisis at the heart of neo-Machiavellianism, the void that all the manipulation and control is meant to fill but never quite does. Some people never have this moment of reckoning. They die with their masks on, surrounded by people who admired them but never knew them, having achieved everything they set out to achieve, and yet somehow having missed the point entirely. Others have the moment but turn away from it, doubling down on their patterns, convincing themselves that the emptiness they feel is simply the price of success, that genuine connection is a naive fantasy, that their way is the only realistic way to navigate a competitive world. They may be right, in a sense. Their way does work, does bring success, does provide a certain kind of satisfaction, but it is a hollow satisfaction, a success that feels increasingly meaningless, a life that looks impressive from the outside but feels empty from the inside. But some, a brave few, have the moment of reckoning and choose to sit with it, to explore it, to allow it to change them. They begin to question their assumptions, to examine their patterns, to consider the possibility that there might be another way. This is terrifying work because it requires them to acknowledge that they have been wrong, that they have wasted years or decades pursuing the wrong things, that they have harmed people in their pursuit of control and success. It requires them to feel guilt that they have been avoiding, to grieve relationships that were never real, to mourn the authentic life they might have lived if they had made different choices. But this grief, as painful as it is also the beginning of healing, because you cannot change what you do not acknowledge, cannot heal what you do not feel, cannot grow beyond patterns you refuse to examine. The willingness to sit with discomfort, to feel the full weight of what has been lost and what has been done, is the first step toward becoming someone different, someone more authentic, someone capable of genuine connection. It is the beginning of removing the mask, not just temporarily but permanently, of discovering who you are beneath the performance and learning to value that person even if they are not as impressive or successful or admirable as the mask you have been wearing. This process of unmasking is not a single event, but a gradual unfolding that happens over months and years. It involves countless small choices to be authentic rather than strategic, to share rather than withhold, to connect rather than control. It involves learning to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing how others will respond, of not being able to predict and manage every interaction, of allowing relationships to develop organically rather than directing them toward predetermined outcomes. It involves developing genuine empathy, the kind that involves actually feeling with others rather than just understanding them intellectually, the kind that makes you vulnerable to their pain and their joy in ways that cognitive empathy never does. This is hard work, perhaps the hardest work a human being can do, because it requires changing not just behaviors, but the fundamental way you relate to yourself and others. It requires developing a new relationship with vulnerability, seeing it not as weakness to be avoided, but as strength to be cultivated. It requires learning to trust, which means accepting that you will sometimes be hurt, sometimes be disappointed, sometimes be betrayed, and choosing to remain open anyway because the alternative, a life of control and isolation, is worse. It requires building a sense of self that is stable and authentic rather than contingent on performance and achievement, a self that can withstand rejection and failure because it is grounded in something deeper than external validation. But the rewards of this work are profound. People who make this journey report feeling more alive, more present, more connected than they ever did during their years of performance and manipulation. They describe a sense of relief at no longer having to maintain the mask, at being able to relax into authenticity, at having relationships where they are known and loved for who they actually are. They talk about discovering parts of themselves they had forgotten or never knew existed, about experiencing emotions with a depth and richness they had not thought possible, about finding meaning and purpose that goes beyond achievement and success. They describe it as coming home to themselves after years of exile, as waking up after years of sleepwalking, as finally being able to breathe after years of holding their breath. This is not to say that the journey is easy or that the destination is perfect. People who move away from neo-Machiavellian patterns still struggle. They still have moments when the old patterns reassert themselves, when they catch themselves manipulating or performing or controlling. They still face situations where strategic behavior seems necessary, where authenticity feels too risky, where the mask seems like the safer choice. But they now have awareness of what they are doing and why, and they have the option to choose differently. They are no longer trapped in their patterns, but can move between authenticity and strategy consciously, using each when appropriate rather than defaulting to manipulation in all situations. They also discover that authenticity does not mean being completely open with everyone all the time. It means being honest with yourself about who you are and what you want, and then making conscious choices about what to share with whom and when. It means having relationships at different levels of intimacy, being strategic with people who have not earned your trust, while being authentic with those who have. It means recognizing that some situations require performance, that some people are not safe for vulnerability, that boundaries and self-protection are not the same as manipulation and control. The difference is in the intention and the awareness, in whether you are performing to protect yourself or to exploit others, in whether you are being strategic as a temporary necessity or as a permanent way of being. For those who have been harmed by neo-Machiavellians, witnessing this kind of transformation can be complicated. On one hand, it offers hope that change is possible, that the person who hurt them might become someone different, someone capable of genuine relationship. On the other hand, it does not undo the harm that was done, does not erase the pain of being manipulated and used, does not obligate them to forgive or reconcile. The neo-Machiavellians' journey toward authenticity is their own work to do, and it does not require the participation or forgiveness of those they have harmed. Victims of manipulation owe their manipulators nothing, not understanding, not compassion, not a second chance. They are free to walk away, to protect themselves, to build lives that do not include the people who hurt them, regardless of whether those people have changed. At the same time, understanding the origins and mechanisms of neo-Machiavellian behavior can help victims heal, not by excusing the behavior, but by depersonalizing it, recognizing that the manipulation was not about them, that they were not targeted because of some flaw or weakness, but simply because they were available and vulnerable, can help reduce shame and self-blame. Understanding that the manipulator was acting from their own wounds and limitations, not from some essential evil, can help reduce the sense of having been uniquely victimized by a monster. This understanding does not make the harm less real or less painful, but it can make it easier to process and move beyond. Healing from manipulative relationships involves several stages. First comes recognition, The moment when you realized that what you thought was genuine connection was actually strategic performance, that you were being used rather than loved. This recognition is often accompanied by shock, denial, and a desperate desire to be wrong. You review the relationship in your mind, looking for evidence that it was real, that the person cared about you, that you were not just a pawn in their game. But the evidence accumulates, the patterns become undeniable, and eventually you have to accept the painful truth. Next comes anger, a hot, righteous fury at having been deceived and used. This anger is healthy and necessary. It is your psyche's way of establishing boundaries that were violated, of asserting that you deserved better, of rejecting the manipulator's narrative that you were complicit or deserving of the treatment you received. Allow yourself to feel this anger fully. Express it in safe ways, through journaling or therapy or conversations with trusted friends. Do not suppress it or rush past it in an attempt to be understanding or forgiving. The anger is doing important work, helping you separate from the manipulator, helping you reclaim your sense of self and your right to be treated with respect. After anger comes grief, a deep sadness for what was lost, for the relationship you thought you had, for the time and energy you invested, for the version of yourself that trusted so completely. This grief is complicated because you are mourning something that was never real, grieving the loss of an illusion. But the pain is real even if the relationship was not, and it deserves to be honored. Allow yourself to mourn. Allow yourself to feel the full weight of the loss. Do not rush yourself or judge yourself for taking time to heal. Recovering from manipulation is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to your capacity for trust and connection, qualities that are valuable even though they made you vulnerable. Alongside the grief often comes shame, a painful sense that you should have known better, should have seen the signs, should have protected yourself. This shame is corrosive and unfair. You were not stupid or weak or naive. You were human, with human needs for connection and understanding, and you encountered someone who had learned to exploit those needs with skill and precision. The fault lies with them, not with you. They chose to manipulate. They chose to use their understanding of human psychology to control rather than to connect. They chose to prioritize their interests over your well-being. These were their choices, and the responsibility for them is theirs alone. As you move through these stages, you begin to rebuild. You learn to trust your perceptions again, to recognize that your instincts were probably warning you all along, but you overrode them because you wanted to believe in the relationship. You learn to set boundaries, to protect yourself, to walk away from situations and people that feel off even if you cannot articulate exactly why. You learn to distinguish between genuine connection and skilled performance, between someone who understands you and someone who is studying you. You learn to value authenticity over charm, consistency over intensity, slow building trust over instant intimacy. You also learn to forgive yourself, to extend to yourself the compassion you would offer a friend in the same situation. You recognize that being manipulated does not make you weak or foolish, but simply human. You acknowledge that you did the best you could with the information and understanding you had at the time. You accept that you will probably be fooled again at some point, because the alternative, becoming so guarded that you never trust anyone, is worse than the risk of occasional betrayal. You choose to remain open to connection while also being more discerning, to trust while also verifying, to hope for the best while also protecting yourself from the worst. And eventually, you reach a place of integration, where the experience of being manipulated becomes part of your story but does not define you. You are wiser for it, more discerning, more aware of the complexities of human behavior. But you are not broken by it. You are not closed off or cynical or unable to trust. You have learned and grown and become more fully yourself, not in spite of the experience, but in some strange way because of it. You have discovered strengths you did not know you had, depths of resilience and courage that only adversity could reveal. You have learned what you will and will not tolerate, what you need in relationships, what genuine connection feels like in contrast to performed intimacy. This journey from victimization to healing to integration is not linear. There are setbacks and relapses, days when the anger or grief or shame feels as fresh as it did in the beginning. There are moments when you doubt your perceptions again, when you wonder if you were too harsh in your judgment, when you consider reaching out to the person who hurt you. These moments are normal and do not mean you are failing at healing. They are simply part of the process, waves in the ocean of recovery that gradually become smaller and less frequent over time. Trust the process. Trust yourself. Trust that you are moving toward healing even when it does not feel like it, even when you seem to be going backward, even when the pain feels endless. And know that you are not alone. Countless others have walked this path before you, have survived manipulation, and emerged stronger and wiser on the other side. Countless others are walking it now, struggling with the same questions and doubts and pain that you are experiencing. There are communities of survivors, therapists who specialize in recovery from manipulative relationships, books and resources and support groups. Reach out, connect, share your story, listen to other stories. Find solidarity in the shared experience of having been harmed and having chosen to heal. This connection, this authentic sharing of pain and hope and growth, is the antidote to the isolation that manipulation creates. It is proof that genuine connection is possible, that not everyone is performing, that trust can be rebuilt and relationships can be real. As we near the end of this exploration, let us return one final time to the central question. When does empathy become a weapon? The answer is when it is used consciously and strategically to control rather than to connect. When understanding of another person's emotions and vulnerabilities is deployed not to support them, but to exploit them. When the appearance of care is performed not out of genuine feeling, but out of calculated self-interest. Empathy becomes a weapon when it is divorced from compassion, when cognitive understanding is not accompanied by emotional resonance, when the goal is power rather than partnership. But empathy can also be a bridge, a tool for genuine connection, a way of understanding and supporting others that enriches both parties. The difference lies not in the empathy itself, but in the intention behind it and the consciousness with which it is used. We all have the capacity for both kinds of empathy, both the weaponized and the connective. We all have moments when we use our understanding of others strategically, when we perform rather than share, when we prioritize our interests over authentic connection. The question is not whether we ever do these things, but how often, how consciously, and to what end. The neo-Machiavellian has made strategic empathy their primary mode of relating, has built their identity around their ability to read and manipulate others, has chosen control over connection so consistently and for so long that it has become their nature. But for most of us, these patterns are occasional rather than constant, situational rather than pervasive. We perform when we feel we must, but prefer authenticity when we feel safe. We use strategic empathy in professional contexts, but seek genuine connection in personal relationships. We are capable of manipulation, but uncomfortable with it, aware of when we are doing it and conflicted about whether it is justified. This discomfort, this awareness, this conflict, is actually a sign of health. It means your conscience is still functioning. Your capacity for genuine empathy is still intact. Your desire for authentic connection is still alive. The danger comes not from occasional strategic behavior, but from the gradual normalization of manipulation, from the slow erosion of guilt and discomfort, from the incremental shift from authenticity as the default with performance as the exception to performance, as the default with authenticity as the exception. This shift can happen so gradually that you do not notice it, can be justified so convincingly that you do not question it, can feel so necessary that you do not resist it. But it is a shift worth noticing, worth questioning, worth resisting, because it is the path from healthy social intelligence to neo-Machiavellianism, from connection to control, from genuine empathy to weaponized understanding. So pay attention. Notice when you are performing and ask yourself why. Notice when you are being strategic and ask yourself whether it is necessary. Notice when you are using your understanding of someone to influence them and ask yourself whether you are serving their interests or only your own. Notice the moments when you feel disconnected from your own emotions, when you are going through the motions of care without actually feeling it, when you are saying what you think someone wants to hear rather than what you actually think. These moments of noticing are opportunities for choice, chances to course correct, invitations to return to authenticity before the performance becomes permanent, and extend the same awareness to your relationships with others. Notice when someone's empathy feels studied rather than spontaneous, when their care feels strategic rather than genuine, when their understanding of you feels like surveillance rather than connection. Notice when you feel seen in a way that is uncomfortable rather than comforting, when someone seems to know too much too quickly, when intimacy develops at a pace that feels rushed rather than organic. Notice when you feel manipulated even if you cannot identify specific manipulative behaviors, when something feels off even if everything looks right, when your instincts are warning you even if your rational mind is telling you to trust. These noticings are your psyche's way of protecting you, and they deserve to be honored even when they are inconvenient or uncomfortable. Trust yourself. Trust your perceptions. Trust your instincts. You know more than you think you know. You sense more than you can articulate. Your body and your unconscious mind are constantly processing information about the people around you, picking up on subtle cues and patterns that your conscious mind has not yet recognized. When something feels off, it probably is off, even if you cannot explain why. When someone seems too good to be true, they probably are. When a relationship feels more like a performance than a genuine connection, it probably is a performance. Trust these feelings. Investigate them. Give them weight in your decision-making. Do not override them just because you want to believe in someone or because you cannot provide rational justification for your discomfort. At the same time, do not become so guarded that you close yourself off to genuine connection. The goal is not to avoid all risk, but to take informed risks, to be open while also being discerning, to trust while also protecting yourself. This balance is delicate and requires constant adjustment. Sometimes you will err on the side of caution and miss out on potentially meaningful relationships. Sometimes you will err on the side of openness and get hurt. Both outcomes are part of being human, part of navigating a social world where not everyone has good intentions, but most people are doing their best. The key is to learn from each experience, to adjust your approach based on what you discover, to become more skilled at distinguishing between genuine and performed connection without becoming cynical or closed. Remember that most people are not neo-Machiavellians. Most people are capable of genuine empathy and authentic connection. Most people want real relationships, not strategic alliances. Most people feel guilty when they manipulate and uncomfortable when they perform. Most people are trying to balance their own needs with care for others, trying to protect themselves while also remaining open, trying to navigate the complexities of human relationship with imperfect tools and incomplete understanding. They are, in other words, just like you, doing their best, making mistakes, learning and growing and trying again. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Give them space to be imperfect. Give them the same compassion and understanding you hope to receive from them. But also recognize that some people are different, that some people have learned to weaponize empathy, that some people will use your openness against you. These people exist, and pretending they do not will not protect you from them. The key is to develop the discernment to recognize them, the boundaries to protect yourself from them, and the strength to walk away from them when necessary. This is not about being paranoid or suspicious. It is about being realistic, about acknowledging the full range of human behavior, about preparing yourself to respond effectively to manipulation when you encounter it. And if you discover that you are the one who has been weaponizing empathy, if you recognize yourself in the descriptions of neo-Machiavellian behavior, know that change is possible. It will not be easy. It will require confronting painful truths about yourself and your impact on others. It will require developing capacities that feel foreign and frightening. It will require risking the very vulnerability you have spent your life avoiding. But it is possible, and it is worth it, because the alternative is a life of achievement without fulfillment, success without satisfaction, connection without intimacy. The alternative is reaching the end of your life and realizing that you were admired but never known, needed but never loved, successful but profoundly alone. The path toward authenticity begins with a single step, a single moment of choosing to be real rather than strategic, to share rather than withhold, to connect rather than control. It continues with countless more such moments, each one a small act of courage, each one a tiny rebellion against the patterns that have defined you. Over time, these moments accumulate. These small acts of authenticity build on each other, and gradually you become someone different. Not perfect, not without struggle, but more genuine, more connected, more alive. You discover that vulnerability, while terrifying, is also liberating. You discover that being known, while risky, is also deeply satisfying. You discover that authentic connection, while unpredictable, is infinitely more nourishing than strategic manipulation. This transformation does not happen in isolation. You will need support, guidance, companionship on the journey. Seek out a therapist who understands personality patterns and can help you develop healthier ways of relating. Find communities of people who value authenticity and can model it for you. Read books and articles about vulnerability, empathy, and genuine connection. Practice in small ways with low-stakes relationships before attempting it in high-stakes ones. Be patient with yourself. Be compassionate with yourself. Recognize that you are unlearning patterns that took years or decades to develop, and that unlearning takes time. Celebrate small victories. Forgive yourself for setbacks. Keep going even when it feels impossible, even when you want to give up, even when the old patterns seem easier and safer. And know that on the other side of this difficult journey is a life that is richer, deeper, more meaningful than anything you have experienced before. A life where you are known and loved for who you actually are. A life where your relationships nourish rather than deplete you. A life where you can relax into authenticity rather than constantly maintaining a performance. A life where you feel connected to yourself and to others in ways that manipulation can never provide. This life is possible for you. It is waiting for you. All you have to do is choose it, moment by moment, day by day, until choosing authenticity becomes as natural as performing once was. The theater of human behavior is vast and complex, full of performances and masks, strategies and manipulations. But it is also full of genuine connection, authentic emotion, real love and care and understanding. Both exist, often side by side, sometimes in the same person, sometimes in the same relationship. The challenge is to navigate this complexity with wisdom and discernment, to appreciate the performances while not mistaking them for reality, to protect yourself from manipulation while remaining open to connection, to use your understanding of human psychology ethically and consciously, in service of connection rather than control. This is the wisdom we must cultivate, the balance we must strike, the choice we must make again and again throughout our lives. It is not a choice between being strategic or being authentic, between protecting ourselves or connecting with others, between using our intelligence or following our hearts. It is a choice to integrate all of these capacities, to be strategic when necessary, but authentic when possible, to protect ourselves while also remaining open, to use our intelligence in service of our hearts rather than in opposition to them. It is a choice to be fully human, with all the complexity and contradiction that entails, rather than reducing ourselves to either naive vulnerability or calculating manipulation. And so we come to the end of this exploration, though the questions it raises will continue long after the words have ended. You now know what neo-Machiavellianism is, how it manifests, where it comes from, what it costs, and how to recognize it in others and in yourself. You know that empathy can be a weapon, but does not have to be. That understanding can be used to control, but can also be used to connect. That the masks we wear can protect us, but can also imprison us. You know that change is possible but difficult, that healing is available but requires work, that authenticity is risky but rewarding. You know, in short, more than you did before, and that knowledge has changed you in ways you may not yet fully recognize. What you do with this knowledge is up to you. You can use it to protect yourself, to build healthier relationships, to become more discerning about who you trust and how you connect. You can use it to examine your own patterns, to recognize where you might be manipulating rather than connecting, to choose authenticity over performance. You can use it to understand others with more compassion, to recognize that even those who harm us are often acting from their own wounds and limitations. You can use it to become more conscious, more intentional, more awake to the complexities of human relationship and your own role in navigating them. Or you can set it aside, return to your life as it was, pretend you never encountered these ideas. That is also a choice, and it is yours to make. But know that the knowledge is there now, planted in your consciousness, and it will grow whether you tend it or not. You will notice things you did not notice before. You will question things you did not question before. You will see patterns in yourself and others that were always there but invisible until now. The veil has been lifted, the curtain has been pulled back, and you cannot unsee what you have seen. The only question is what you will do with this new vision, how you will integrate it into your life, how you will allow it to shape who you become. Choose wisely. Choose consciously. Choose in alignment with your deepest values and your truest self. Choose connection over control, authenticity over performance, genuine empathy over weaponized understanding. Choose to be someone who uses their knowledge of human psychology to build rather than to destroy, to support rather than to exploit, to love rather than to manipulate. Choose to be someone who removes the mask, at least sometimes, at least with some people, and allows themselves to be truly known. Choose to be someone who values being loved over being admired, being understood over being needed, being authentic over being successful. Choose, in other words, to be fully human, with all the vulnerability and courage and beauty that entails. The stage is set. The performance is ending. The masks are coming off, or they are staying on. The choice, as it has always been, is yours. But now you make it with awareness, with understanding, with knowledge of what you are choosing and what you are giving up. And that awareness, that consciousness, that ability to choose rather than simply react, is perhaps the greatest gift this exploration can offer. Not answers, not certainty, not a clear path forward, but the ability to see clearly, to choose consciously, to take responsibility for who you are and who you are becoming. This is the beginning of wisdom, the foundation of growth, the path toward a life that is authentic rather than performed, connected rather than controlled, meaningful rather than merely successful. And so the curtain falls on this act. But the show continues, inside each of us, in the silence of our thoughts. The mask we have analyzed today, you may know it well. You may wear it, or perhaps you see it in someone you love. The comment section below is not a place for judgment. It is our stage for confessions, a safe space for observers. Use that space to share your story. What mask did you have to wear to survive? We want to hear from you. And if you felt understood here, subscribe. Because here, you are not alone. Together, we will keep unraveling human theater, one mask at a time. The next act is about to begin,